Hi everyone, and welcome to Undertake Project Work Assessment 2. My name's Aidan. You've probably seen me before in the other webinars. So what we'll be doing today is jumping into the project we've been talking about for so long. Let's get started. Okay, so what's today's purpose? Today's purpose is to really clarify what we need in this assessment. It is quite big. It can be a bit confusing, but it's really not too difficult. So I just want to make sure everyone's on board and they know what they need to use and where they need to use it. How will the session run? So what I'll be basically doing is I'll go through the project plan. I'll show you everything you need to include, how to use it, where to put it, and just make sure that everyone knows what's involved. I'll work through it as it is in the task sheet so I don't miss anything or confuse anyone. And essentially, if you have any questions about any of it at the end, I'll give you my contact details and we can have a bit of a talk about it further if you like. So how can you get the most out of this webinar? So as I mentioned in the previous webinar, Assessment 1, you really need to make sure you have a clear vision of your project at this point and that you do understand a lot of the key terminology and I guess tools to be using in your project plan. Definitely by now you should have had Assessment 1 marked as satisfactory by your mentor. Really want to make sure you've got that down 100% before you dive into this one. And obviously, the more of your learning content you're familiar with, the better the easier it'll be to get through this. So what happens after the webinar? After this webinar, you'll have to obviously submit your assessment to your mentor. This one can take a little while to mark. So don't be disheartened if it takes a little while. And you can't move on to assessment 3 until you've had this one marked as satisfactory. I'll go into that a bit more detail later, but really, once you've done this one, have a little break and wait for your mentor to get in touch and give you a bit of feedback about your project. All right, let's get started. So I've gone through in quite a bit of detail on assessment 1, what the project's about. It'll make more sense once you've gone through and you've seen the separate sections. Essentially what we're doing here is a project proposal. So think of this as a very persuasive piece. We're putting this together so we can hand it to someone and say, hey, look, here's my plan. Here's what I want to do. Do you approve? Can we go forward? So really think of it like that. Think of it too, if you were given this project, how much detail do you think you would want or need to read? So really keep that in mind when you're talking about the different aspects as we go through it. Look, it doesn't have to be it's not going to be a 40-page document, but it needs to have enough detail. So as the reader, I can see what you were doing, why you were doing it, what's going on. Just make sure it's very clear. Part A. So let's dive in to the task sheet. So part A, what we're really talking about. Oh, I've got the wrong one here. Give me 1 second. Here we go. Part A is really the planning. So it's planning of the project. What we're going to be doing here is creating an agenda and minutes of the meeting, very similar to what we did in the managed meetings unit. Although in this one, you don't actually have to have the meeting. We're just going to do a bit of a plan for it. You will have 2 templates you will use. You will have this one here, which is the agenda for the meeting. Very straightforward, date, venue, location, times, and the discussion points you'll fill in down here. Now, there are 8 discussion points you have to include, but look, honestly, you could have 20 or 30. Don't do 20 or 30, do 8. But you won't have any trouble filling that in. And then in each of here, just a brief overview of what the agenda item's about. So discussion point 3 might be something like budget. And then just a bit of information there. Doesn't need to be a lot of detail because that's what we're going to do in the minutes. So then we're going to have the meeting. You're going to go through and prepare the minutes and you're going to fill in this template, which is more or less exactly the same. Now in this one, there's a few key differences. Obviously in the details you have to fill up here. Discussion points will remain the same, time will remain the same, but decisions, outcomes, actions required. For each discussion point, I really want to see what you decided upon. What was the outcome? Who's involved? Very important. When do they have to do it by? very important, and how are they going to do it? So these are going to vary very differently depending on what your project is about. But just make sure, for someone who wasn't at this meeting, I should be able to look at this, know exactly what was discussed and what we're going to do about it. So it doesn't have to be huge, little short paragraph, a few dot points in here for each one, but just make sure you've got that detail. So at the end of this meeting, everyone should understand what the project's about, how we're doing it, what are we going to do, when we're doing it. Make sure you have that level of detail. So that's the minutes. Again, you just need to complete those, fill them out. It's fairly intuitive, and it's very similar to what you would have done in your managed meetings unit. But if you do have any issues there, definitely get in touch with your mentor. If you're a bit confused about what you do or don't need to include, definitely get in touch. That's part A. So part A is planning of the meeting, pre-meeting. Pre-project planning, if you will. That's all you really need to do there. But at the end of part A, I want to be able to see that you very clearly have an idea of what the project is about. Part B, this is the project. So, as I talked about earlier, it's really going to be a proposal. So you're going to go through, you're going to have an introduction, you're going to have the details, you're going to have supporting evidence, you're going to have this and that. I'll go through each section relatively briefly. I'll touch on what they are. Some of them you might be pretty clear on. This is a good time to really go through, give it a go, and talk to your mentor about what you need to include, or have you got enough detail. I definitely recommend sending in a draft for this one, because it can just get a bit confusing. There's a lot of words there, but essentially the project won't be that big. So we'll start with an executive summary. An executive summary is just very much a very brief summary. A paragraph here is all I want to see. You generally write this at the end, right at the end, the very last thing you do, because by then you've already written the report. What I want to see here is, I should be able to read this executive summary and know everything that's in the report. If I had 20 seconds, what would you tell me happened? Very, very brief summary, but everything has to be in there. I want to read that and know whether or not it's worth me reading the rest of the report, if that makes sense. Table of contents, fairly straightforward. An introduction. So the introduction should really paint the picture. Tell me what the project's about. Why are we doing this? What's included? So what have we discussed in this project plan? And the intended outcomes. So really tell me the story here, paint the picture, and convince me why are we doing this? Why does this need to be done? That's all we really need to do. It's a good lead in. It'll start you up. You'll also talk about, okay, we had a project charter, we've had a work breakdown schedule. This is how we did each of these, which will make more sense soon. And then we're going to come to the body of the report. The project charter is, I will show you that in a second. We'll go through that soon. The project charter is basically a short document. What you'll be doing is copy and pasting that in. Here we go. And you'll be filling in all the details here. So this is really the backbone of your project. You'll be going through things like this: project title, project manager, need, description, start date, finish date. It's really those, nuts and bolts of the whole thing. You shouldn't have any problem filling a lot of this in, because it'll be very similar to what you did in assessment 1. If you are a bit confused by any of these sections, though, definitely let us know. Like I've always said, feel free to send me a quick text or an email. Again, approach very similar to what you did in assessment 1. The roles and responsibilities here, you're just going to make people up. It's fine. You'll obviously be the project manager, but everyone else will just be friends or family. It's up to you. So that's the project charter. And all you need to do is, what I would recommend for your whole project plan here is put it all in one document. Just copy and paste that across, put it in between your introduction and the next section. Project scope. So we want you to talk about, similar to assessment 1, what is and what isn't included in this project. So talk about the limits of your own responsibility and your reporting requirements. So what are you involved with? What do you have to report on? What are you responsible for? And just based upon that, are there any other projects occurring? And if so, what is the relationship? There's a good chance yours is a one-off event because we do kind of paint the picture that way. WBS. So a WBS is a work breakdown structure. I have an example for you here. You'll need to develop and include one of these. This doesn't need to be a work of art. Feel free to do it in paint, anything, whatever's easiest for you, whatever you find simple. As long as I can clearly see how you've done it. Just don't make sure nothing's cut off or anything like that. Essentially, what it is your project as a whole will sit up the top. Now, you'll break the project down into subsections. So these might be the prepping, the building, and the cleaning up afterwards, depending on your project. Could be anything. Each one of those you're going to break down a little bit further into different tasks. So the prepping might be remove rubbish, and it might be clear garden beds. So you've kind of got two jobs in those. And then we'll break it down a bit further. So the clear garden bed task might have a few sections. It might be removal of dirt and relocation of other plants. So you've really broken it down then, and you want to keep going until each one of these is a separate task that you could allocate to a person. You could keep going and breaking it down, breaking it down, breaking it down. We don't want you to go that far, but do try and break it down to the point of one job. So that one job then would be relocation of plants. So someone's job is to remove the plants, which is in itself part of the bigger task. That's what you need to do here. I would be happy with about as much detail as this one here. You don't need to go into very menial tasks, but I do want to see you break it down to about the level of this example work breakdown structure. Awesome. Any confusion with these charts we're doing, do let me know. A Gantt chart with an activity list. So you've probably seen a Gantt chart before, even if you don't know you have. I would recommend looking up examples and possibly creating one in Excel would be the easiest way. The important thing with the Gantt chart is that some of the tasks will overlap, and just make sure that you make it very clear the tasks that are separate and the time frame in which they occur. So you'll see a few examples. It'll be the rows will be the tasks and the columns will generally be the time. The purpose of this is to really show when some tasks can overlap and when some have to be completed at completely different times. What we're really trying to do with these work breakdown schedules, these charts, and the network diagram we're going to look at next, is to really clearly differentiate each task in the plan and when it has to be completed. So we'll look at a network diagram or a PERT chart. So I've got one here. So it'll look like this. Essentially, it's a flowchart, but what you'll see is that if you could imagine a column for each one of these is occurring at the same time. So these three tasks here, they're individual tasks. It's very similar to what we had in the WBS. These are occurring at more or less the same time, similar to these two here, these two here. Now, what you need to include for each one is the date, the name of the task, and the date. And you'll notice that some are red. Now, the red is the critical path. There's a bit of information for here you can read. This is all available on the LMS, by the way. It's under your resources. The red path is the critical path. Now, this is the path with the tasks that must be completed, I guess, on time, or they have to be done first. So these black ones here, we can more or less think of those occurring on the side. We're kind of doing those at the same time, but these are the things that have to be done for the project to continue. Now, this is a really nice looking chart. Yours might be more or less a straight line. All we're trying to get you to do here is to consider, can you do multiple tasks at the same time? And how do you make sure they don't conflict with each other? So you'll notice this is the critical path. It flows through here. These things have to get done. These two here have to occur at the same time, and they both have to occur. yours might not be this complicated. Definitely have a bit of a look around, look at some more examples to get a good feel of what you would want to include in a chart like this. Project budget. So a budget, I would recommend doing something similar to what we did in Manage Finances. So I would break down each major cost for your plan. Again, it depends the budget you've given yourself. It might be 5,000, 10,000, 50,000. Break down all the major costs, everything you've identified. So 2,000 here, 3,500, wages, electricity, rent, everything like that, equipment. Break it all down. What I would suggest then too is next to that, so that's the budgeted figure. Remember what we did in Manage Finances. Have an actual figure. And then again, you're just making this up. You don't really know it yet. Compare the variance, any projected variance, or have you accounted for any strange expenses? Have you got money left over? Are you overshooting your budget already before you've even started? It's a good chance to have a look at it. And these are only hypothetical figures. They're projected. You might have a bit of leeway. It's up to you. I just want to see that you've really considered your budget, what you need to spend the money on, and how you're going to spend it. Project risk. So we're going to do a risk management plan. There is a template on the LMS as well. Again, this is all under assessment 2 on the LMS. There is a template that looks like this. So there's a bit of information here. The way you'd read this, you would assess a risk by its likelihood and the consequence of the risk. Now, if you thought the risk was unlikely and it was a moderate risk, you would read across to get your rating. You may have seen something like this before. They're all very similar. Some have numbers, letters, different figures, everything like that. Essentially, you just want to know how risky something is based upon how likely it is that it will happen and how bad things will be if it does happen. So obviously, if it's almost certain that it's going to happen and it's critical, it's an extreme risk, and you don't want that. Obviously, if it's something down here, a low risk, you're not going to forget about it, but it's not going to be a big issue. It's something you might need. This might be something like sunburn. Whereas almost certain critical, this could be the project burning down. It's up to you to talk about the risks that your project might have, and it's going to differ quite a lot based upon what your project is. What we want you to do is just this table here. Fill in the details, compiled by yourself, reviewed dates, date of next review, you can make that one up. Might be 6 months, might be 3 months, depending on your project, and just the name of your project. What we want you to do here is list 3 major risks, probably the 3 most likely to happen. The category will be whether it's an internal risk or an external. Is this part of what we're directly doing, or is it something we can't control? External would be outside of our control. The owner would be who's responsible for it. That doesn't mean they have to do everything around this, but they're going to be the main ones sort of following up, monitoring the risk, making sure everything's going well. Likelihood is up to you. You just decide, pick the number from here. Depending on your risk, you might say it's a possible, so it's a 3. The consequence, you'll go, oh, it's not too bad, it's only minor, it's a 2. So what we're going to do there is we're going to give it a risk score of moderate. And the risk approaches and person responsible. What are you going to do? How are you going to stop this risk from happening? If it is sunburn, this might be, let's just go through it. Sunburn, category would be external, owner would be anyone. Likelihood, let's say it's likely, so it's a 4. Consequence, it's insignificant, 1. So it's a low risk. Risk approaches, we're going to provide sunscreen, we're going to provide shade, we're going to educate the staff about the risks, slip, slop, slap, all that sort of thing. And that's what we really want to see there, that you've kind of gone through and you've considered, okay, what risks do we have to manage? Hopefully you're still with me. Project quality. So just at the end of your project, we just want to know how you intend to incorporate quality into your project. So how are you going to make sure that things are going well as they're going through? How are you going to make sure that everyone involved is happy and informed? What kind of feedback are you going to gather? What information? Who are you going to talk to? How are you going to make sure that you're doing your job well, essentially? Doesn't have to be huge there, just a short paragraph. Finally, a conclusion. Make comments on the proposed project and recommend approval or sign off. Remember, this is a proposal. So just basically sum it up in a couple of sentences. Say, look, you've seen this, you've seen that. This is what we're going to do. This is our time frame. This is our budget. If you're in agreement, please sign here. That's all you have to do. And an appendix. So any extra plans, graphs, tables, any diagrams, anything like that you've included, you'd put in your appendix. That's essentially it. It is a bit big and clunky, and there's a lot more information down here to help you with it. But essentially what you'll be doing is taking a lot of those templates and those charts, and you're just going to be, like I said, put them in one document, put it together to form more or less a coherent report. So you're going to start with your executive summary and your introduction, and you're going to be talking about that, and then you're going to copy the project charter in, and that's going to be basically the backbone of, here's the information. Then you're going to go through and you're going to do a few charts, because if you were presenting this to someone, you'd want to demonstrate, okay, we've planned out when this is happening. This is when this step is. This is what it involves. Here we go, A, B, C. Budget, you want to talk about the money, where you're going to be spending the money. Risk management, what do we have to be careful of? What's involved? And then project quality, how are we getting the feedback? How are we going to make sure this is working? Excuse me. So it's really just putting this all together to tell a story. It's a very persuasive piece. So make sure that you're selling this. You're going to be handing this over to someone and saying, hey, look, here's my project. Here's everything in it. Do you want to do this? Do you want to give me this money? Are we going to do this? So it has to include all that detail. I shouldn't really be asking questions at the end of this about what are you doing here or how are you doing this, because you should have covered that. It doesn't have to be huge amounts of detail, but by the end of this, okay, that's where that money's going. And in August, they should be on this step and they would have spent this much money. And this is how I'll know it's going well, because in the project quality, they're going to have a review at this time. Again, it's really just putting all of this together and making this project whole. So that's it. Again, it's 1,500 words. It's not huge. The biggest part, the most time-consuming thing is going to be doing the diagrams, making little fiddly bits. So we've pretty much just done the recap. Again, sell it to me. Make me want to read this. Make me want to see this project come to life. So where to from here? Dive in, give it a go. Start with your agenda and your minutes. Really plan it out. Plan out your project. Pretend you're there. Pretend you're doing this. Pretend this is real. Like get the image in your head. Create this project. And the most important part is that you kind of just add that detail in. Make it come to life. If you do have any questions, get in touch. Like I said, you can do this any way you want. You can have, as long as it's reasonable, and you can back it up with some evidence or some reasoning, and you can sell it to me, it'll be great. I just want to make sure that you've given it a good effort and you've made a viable project plan. But if you do have any questions about, can I include this, or what do I have to put here, get in touch with us. So feel free to give me a call, 0466 376 861, or give me an email. Feel free to send me a text as well. That's always a great way to just answer some quick questions. If you need any more support, the study support sessions are a really great way to, I guess, plan this one out. Like I said, the most difficult part about this unit is it's a bit overwhelming. There's a lot going on. If you need printouts, lay it all out on the table in front of you. Get your head around it and get stuck into it. So what's next? Jump in, give it a go. Send us a draft is probably the best way to do it. It's very easy to kind of gloss over or miss a section in this, so really use your mentor in this area here. What we'll be doing after this one, as I talked about earlier, you can't start assessment 3 until assessment 2 has been marked as satisfactory. Assessment 3 will be doing the exact same thing, but changing a few figures. It's a lot easier than this one. Thanks for watching. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with anyone in the mentor team. We'd love to give you a hand.